Thank you for joining. We'll do introductions first. I'm Nancy Barron. I'm a senior customer success manager focusing on our launch group, our scale group. So I do a lot of the trainings, and you might see me if you ever are emailing the customer success team. And I also work with a lot of customers on deliverability. And with me is Mike Aldridge, superstar in his own right.
I'm Mike. I manage deliverability for Customer IO and spend a weird amount of time thinking about it.
Cool, thank you. So who you won't see on screen, but will be talking to you in the background is Leah Thompson. She's also a customer success manager here, also focusing a lot on deliverability. We have two channels that you'll see. One is chat, where you're chatting now, which is great. There's also a questions tab, which I see a couple lit up. Leah will be communicating with you in chat, also answering some questions in there if she's got like a handy link or something like that. So please don't wait till the end to ask your questions. Go ahead and pop them in there, and she might be able to answer. And then after about a 20-minute overview with Mike talking about who it applies to, kind of what's changing and how to prepare, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So if your questions weren't answered in the chat, or if it's not something that we need to take offline, Mike will be addressing those, not me, afterwards. So that's how the game's going to go. And with that, let's go ahead and start getting into the intro. So Mike, there's been some questions around, who actually this applies to. Is it only bulk senders? Is it people who are doing smaller sends? So, does this apply to everyone? And is it going to be other inbox providers besides Gmail and Yahoo? Kind of what do we know here?
Yeah, definitely. So with when this guidance was originally announced, pretty much the nature of the announcements and what shape it was going to take were very broad, and over time, as we're leading up into February, Gmail and Yahoo have steadily, refined that clarification and given us a lot more information. So the original announcement was that this would only apply to bulk senders, and then it was announced that what a bulk sender actually is, which is somebody who sends 5,000 emails to Gmail recipients in one day. So the final clarification that Gmail has provided is that if you ever reach that threshold, if you ever reach 5,000 Gmail recipients in one day, then you will kind of start to be not scrutinized, but you will fall into the guidelines for a bulk sender. And once you become labeled as a bulk sender, that's a lifetime label for that DKIM signed domain. And also the 5,000 number is not a hard and fast threshold either. It's kind of a ballpark amount of emails. So with all that being said, and kind of how I've operated ever since this announcement was made, is I think every sender should just treat themselves as a bulk sender as far as the guidelines are concerned, and take steps to apply all these required guidelines. Just because I get the impression that the industry will likely be moving to the point where these just do become standards, which kind of leads into, Nancy, the other thing you mentioned, which was, are other inbox providers other than Yahoo and Gmail going to be implementing similar requirements? There have been no public announcements or private announcements, but there has been a lot of discussion, and Gmail and Yahoo definitely set the tone for the industry, and Gmail has been a standard setter for decades. So I think it's safe to assume that other inbox providers may kind of follow suit with similar requirements. And again, kind of like I said before, assume you are a bulk sender, because following these requirements is only going to be great for your deliverability in general. So,
yeah, and I think a lot of the customer accounts I look at, if not the majority, a huge chunk is Gmail, anyways, right? Like
it's usually about 60%.
Definitely takes the line. Yeah, takes the lion's share. Yeah. So it does feel like there's a lot of changes coming down the pike with all this, but it really seems to fall into just three buckets. So can you kind of break that out for us?
Yeah, so we'll just kind of start with each of the graphics. So with authentication, that one, when I first, because as I kind of read down the requirements too when they were first announced, I was like, all right, let's see, what do we got? What do we need to do? Authentication was an easy one. So if you send from the customer IO network, we do and have always required SPF and DKIM be configured for all sending domains. And if you don't have that, you actually can't send live email from customer IO. The goal with that is just we like to set everybody up for success, and there's no reason not to authenticate. So you're covered there. And even if you're using a custom SMTP, SendGrid, Mailgun, I know that they also have, they make it really easy to set up SPF and DKIM as well. So that's the easy part, and that's kind of just a nuts and bolts thing. Kind of extending beyond that, DMARC. DMARC. It's a thing in the industry that I think is a bit misunderstood from a deliverability standpoint. But essentially what it is you are telling inbox providers who support DMARC, which is the vast majority of them, what to do with emails that are sent from your domain but are not authenticated. Now, part of the new Gmail Yahoo requirements is they are requiring that senders have a basic DMARC policy. And what that means is you just have a policy. And it comes in the form of a text record. And we do have in our blog post guidance on how to create this at a very basic level. You just need a text record that has a basic bare bones policy. So it's kind of the required text record doesn't actually do anything. It's P equals none. And what that means is you're telling inbox providers that if my email is not authenticated, then don't do anything. I do have my suspicions, and I have a lot of tinfoil hat theories, just kind of the nature of the work, that they might expand this requirement in the future. They might start requesting that senders have P equals quarantine or P equals reject. And that means you're actually declaring in your DMARC policy, if messages are not aligned with either DKIM or SPF, that we're going to send that message to the spam folder, and that would be quarantine, or we're just going to reject it. So you'd be asking inbox providers to bounce that message. And again, yeah, we're going to drop that link in the chat. So, and actually one quick thing to mention about DMARC is when you put a DMARC policy on your root domain, it does automatically apply to any subdomains, unless you could put more granular policies at the subdomain level, or you can just have that general root domain policy, which will cover all of your subdomains, which includes your customer.io specific sending domain. And that's a record that you'll make with your DNS provider. If you ever have any questions on how to do that, we're always here to support you through it. Nothing too crazy. So, and I hear tell that there's a bit of concern around unsubscribes and some interest in this requirement. So it's pretty much been what I've been talking to people about for weeks. So some clarity on unsubscribes. While the initial rollout of the new Gmail Yahoo guidelines is going to be the 1st of February, the unsubscribe requirement doesn't actually go active until June 1st. So for any of you who are kind of worried about implementation, that's not something that you need to do by February 1st. So Nancy always makes fun of me because the version of one-click unsubscribe, the header that Gmail and Yahoo are looking for, is something I always call it the RFC 8058 one-click unsubscribe, and she makes fun of me every time. But essentially, what they're asking for is they want senders to implement. It's an email header. So this is a declaration within the raw code of the email. And what makes it a little bit different than original unsubscribe is that it informs inbox providers who provide that little unsubscribe link what to do when recipients click on it. And the setup of it is something that at Customer IO, we're currently rolling this out for all customers, and it'll be out well before June 1st. So anyone who uses our default unsubscribe system will be covered for this Gmail Yahoo requirement. And anyone who's using a custom unsubscribe system, we're also going to be providing, reasonable guidance on how to get that set up. At the end of the day, put simply, you're going to put a header in the emails that you configure that actually the content of the header, instead of being a mail to or a URL, it's actually a URL or URI for a post command. Now, I'm already getting nerdy about it, but long story short, we'll be providing customers with guidance, and I can definitely get more into the weeds about this with anyone who wants to, offline. But It's basically just the newer standard of unsubscribe technology. It's a technical standard that we will definitely be meeting, and we can offer some guidance to people who want to roll something out themselves that are not using our custom unsubscribe functionality. I feel like that was just totally word soup, but
yeah, I mean, just to put like an exclamation point on it, if you're using our unsubscribe link, our default behavior, our subscription center, you're going to get it for free. You don't have to know that it's an RFC something or other and and do any processing on your end. We'll handle all of that for you, correct?
yes, correct. Yeah, we've had a lot of talks with industry professionals and Gmail about the best way to roll this out. So we will have it rolled out to spec. And just to kind of zoom out of the one-click unsubscribe aspect, a lot of senders have been really curious about, do all messages need to have an unsubscribe link? This was a question that, all of us in my profession raised when this first came out as well. The guidance has been pretty crystal clear from Gmail and Yahoo. Only non-transactional emails need to have an unsubscribe link. With that comes a caveat. So if you have transactional messages that do not have an unsubscribe link, and let's say some marketing content snuck in there, or your transactional messages happen to be seeing a high complaint rate, the guidance from Gmail and Yahoo is to maybe think about including an unsubscribe link in that case. But we've been given assurances that they will be able to differentiate between the mail streams. So only your non-transactional messaging needs to have an unsubscribe link.
Cool. And I'm going to circle back on one thing on the one click,
Sure.
Because I have seen this a lot in the box. Like if you click on the link and then you go to a page and the only thing you're clicking is, all you have to do is click unsubscribe all, you've met the one click. It's not one click on the email and you're gone for good. It's okay to have that single click confirmation on the landing page.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's actually something that, because, if you actually look at CAN spam and you look at legislation, it says, one click unsubscribe. But if you actually get into the nitty gritty, it is technically one click unsubscribe. So once a person clicks your unsubscribe link, there should be no barrier between them just taking one additional action to unsubscribe. So having someone log into your subscription center would be non-compliant with that requirement. I'm even of the mindset that having somebody type in their email address is not the best way to do it, although I think that does technically qualify. It's just kind of an old way of doing things. So long story short, make it easy for recipients to unsubscribe, and when they unsubscribe, honor it. And that's really what Gmail and Yahoo are looking for. Are you honoring those unsubscribes, within 48 hours, within a timely manner? So, yeah, and I'm sure we'll have more questions at the end about one-click unsubscribe and RFC 8058. I just had to say it to mess with you, Nancy. But
on the spam rate, Leah just pointed out, I put the 0 in the wrong place. It should be 0.3%, not 0.03%. So people have a lot more room there, but you could go up to 0.3%. Do you want to talk a little bit more about spam rate?
Yeah. So, and with Gmail and Yahoo, this spam rate there's a lot of confusion around spam rates, especially when it comes to Gmail. And I did see a question in the chat earlier. Gmail has never managed spam rates in the same way that a lot of other inbox providers do, in that if a Gmail recipient marks your message as spam, that spam complaint is not returned to the sender. And this has been their policy forever for privacy reasons. So you won't see those Gmail spam rates in any metrics for any inbox, for any email sending platform. It's just not something they provide. Now, you can see your Gmail specific spam rate within Postmaster tools. And if you are a premium customer who's worked with anything related to deliverability, I'm sure your CSM has already mentioned this. And if not them, then definitely a member of our deliverability team. So the guidance is you'll want to stay below 0.3% for your Gmail specific sending. This is the same threshold for Yahoo. There is a bit of a tricky thing in that Yahoo also only calculates the spam rate out of messages that reach the inbox, like how many of those were complained against, as opposed to the more traditional calculation where spam rate's calculated out of every message that you send. So Yahoo is only factoring in those emails that reach the inbox. The one problem, or not problem, but the one confusing part there is that they have not yet provided a means of checking that specific spam rate. So spam rates, if a Yahoo recipient marks your message as spam, you will see that in the customer IO metrics. But it's there. That's kind of one of those things we're waiting for a bit more clarification on from the Yahoo side. But if anyone needs any guidance with checking their Gmail specific spam rates, definitely reach out to our team or reach out to your CSM. We're happy to guide you through getting that configured. So the way this rolls out too, Gmail has provided a lot more guidance, and I think that was a big question when all this stuff was announced: is what happens when I reach that threshold? Am I going to get blocked? Is my reputation going to take a hit? Am I going to get throttled? Am I going to get filtered? The answer is any of those things can happen. But what Gmail is doing is they're doing essentially a slower rollout. Basically, on February 1st, what has been given to us as the guidance is a small amount of traffic. If it's reaching this 0.3% threshold, Gmail will apply either bounces, filtration, or temporary throttling to a portion of that traffic. Now, as time goes on, once we start getting into April, and I can clarify this a bit more later, it's going to essentially be a slow rollout of these new standards and a slow rollout of any bounce messages or throttling that might occur when these thresholds are met. And one thing that we do have pretty crystal clear assurances of is that if a message bounces because of this, the bounce message itself will be very clear in plain English as to why the message bounced and what you can do to correct that.
Cool. So you kind of addressed that phased
I did a little bit. I jumped ahead. Was that too
with consequences? So people, and you've already let the big thing go that some of the stuff you have till June. So can you put a little bit more clarity on that?
Absolutely. So basically, there are three key phases with this rollout. So this is another thing that Gmail provided that clarity on, which I very much appreciate. So the three phases, the three benchmarks in months would be February, April, and June. So in February 2024, bulk senders who do not meet the requirements will start getting temporary errors with error codes on a small percentage of their non-compliant traffic. And basically the temporary errors, which means it's going to hold off on delivering that message, it's going to soft bounce, and we will automatically retry those. These temporary errors are meant to help senders identify traffic that doesn't meet the Gmail guidelines. And this gives senders an opportunity to start resolving those issues, as we move forward into that new era. In April 2024, Gmail will start rejecting a percentage of non-compliant email traffic, and they're going to gradually increase this rejection rate. So, for example, 75% of a sender's traffic meets the Gmail requirements. They're going to start rejecting a percentage of the remaining 25% of traffic that is not compliant. So the actual mechanism through which this occurs is not super clear. Could have something to do with certain headers and certain things. And Gmail's system is the most advanced in the world. So if they say that their system is going to do something, I generally have a lot of confidence that that's true. The final date, again, like I mentioned earlier, June 1st, that one-click unsubscribe must be present in all commercial and promotional messages. And so another question that comes up, and this is something that I think, Nancy, we hadn't talked about yet, is what happens if I don't have this one-click unsubscribe? The full impact of that is not yet announced, but the one thing that Gmail has said in their most recent guidance is that if you do not have an unsubscribe link that meets that RFC 8058 standard, the one-click post unsubscribe, then if you request mitigation from Gmail, they do have a sender contact form, which I get the impression that they might in the future become more responsive when senders reach out for assistance. But what they have told us is if the unsubscribe link is not present, then senders will not qualify for mitigation. So does that mean that messages won't bounce or be rejected because of a lack of an unsubscribe link? I can't speak to that because I'm definitely trying to just stick within the facts, when we communicate about this. But that is the outcome that Gmail has mentioned as of now. If a sender doesn't have that link, they won't qualify for any expanded assistance should something arise. And it's also just a standard. So I always say senders need to keep up with the most up-to-date unsubscribe standards, because why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah. And I think that really leads us into how do folks prepare, right? Like it's one thing to know this is all coming, but how do folks prioritize what needs to be done? Like, what would you suggest?
So starting top to bottom, it is kind of an odd thing with these requirements, because when you just look at the 3 bullets, it doesn't seem like all that much. So I'd say at a bare minimum, senders need to configure those SPF and DKIM records. That's something that we already require. If you're sending email from customer.io, then that's already covered. You also want to create that DMARC policy on the root domain. And I think we're going to drop a link to our blog post, which has that bare bones DMARC policy that you can create. Granted, you can really expand on this. And if you ever need assistance or have questions about making a DMARC policy that's more robust, our team's always here to help you out with that. So that would be the next step, creating that DMARC policy. And here, ensuring that all emails contain an unsubscribe option. As I mentioned before, the new one-click unsubscribe standard, which actually, for the first time in history, is a true one-click unsubscribe. So when that's in place, if someone clicks the client-side unsubscribe link, it will be a one-click unsubscribe that it's up to senders to honor. We will set up all of our customers for success there who send from our system. And if you have a custom unsubscribe option, we have some guidance that we're going to be rolling out within the next week, some public-facing documentation that at least will get the people in your organization responsible for managing your subscription center and the development of it. It'll get them, it'll have enough information to where they can kind of just take over from there. So it's definitely something that requires some tech heavy lifting, but we're happy to provide that guidance, and we'll keep everyone posted there. And the one that I think has a lot of senders a bit unsure is decreasing those spam rates as quickly as they can. Now, the best way to do that, and it's something that we always say, and I'm sure that anytime you've had an experience talking about deliverability with our team, best practices probably came up at some point. Now, our suggested best practices are designed based on guidance of inbox providers and our own pretty extensive experience on the topic. So if you go through our best practices documentation, which I think Leah can drop a link there as well, strictly follow all those steps. Like, take a very real look at your email program. Are there any places where there are some holes or some things that might be leading to slightly increased complaints? So at the end of the day, it's keeping those lists clean, focusing on email engagement, keeping track of your reputation, verifying email addresses, creating a criteria through which you're letting people go after a period of inactivity, and sending those emails that people really love, those emails that people are excited to receive, that are super relevant to their relationship with your brand. That's really the way out of spam complaints, because what a spam complaint at the end of the day really is someone getting an email they didn't want or did not expect. So it does sound very broad. I mean, I think your own business is going to have its own realities, and your recipients are going to have their own behaviors. So I say listen to that. If you see emails, certain campaigns aren't doing well, or certain recipient groups, segments aren't interacting or engaging with your emails as much, continually iterate and try to experiment and try to really keep the ultimate goal being send your recipients emails that they really want.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent suggestions, and we've got, I think in here there's links to the docs. There's also a link here to a previous training webinar that Leah and I did. So if you're interested in really delving into the details, go check out that recording. But yeah, I think there's always more to learn, and keeping an eye on what your customers are essentially telling you through your engagement metrics is the key. So the other thing I want to plug is that blog post that you mentioned, Mike. So there's a link there. Likely you've already seen it if you're interested in this topic, but Mike's written up like all the kind of pertinent information, salient information of what you see here, and much to his chagrin, he's continuing to update it because we're on
our 4th update.
Getting information all the time. So bookmark that blog post. And if you're ever wondering if something has changed, you can go back and check out the latest just by going there. And that's one place that you can just kind of keep your finger on the pulse. Yep.
Most recently updated on the 8th. And if you look at the top, I'll let you know. when the article was last updated, and I imagine it'll probably be updated a few more times as we move on through. So,
yeah, cool. All right, so I know Leah's been frantically probably answering questions in the questions box. Leah, is there a first one that we should be asking Mike?
yes.
Yes, there is.
So this is a great one. If and when will senders see Google spam complaints or Gmail spam complaints within Customer IO? I think it's probably safe to say that'd be a never. I don't think Gmail has any tentative plans for surfacing and responding to those spam complaints and sending those back to the sender. So that's always going to be in Postmaster tools. So yep, that's the place to see those spam complaint rates.
Okay. Here's one that's just kind of confirming on the transactional. So do unsubscribe rules apply to transactional for things like changing your password?
They do not. So transactional messages, and I always feel the need to preface it. No, unsubscribe rules do not apply to transactional messages as long as those messages are truly transactional. I always say this too. I think this is probably the example that causes the most confusion. An abandoned cart email is not a transactional email. It's any email that's designed to nudge someone towards a conversion. Anything that has marketing content in it is not a transactional email. So a transactional email I always see as something that somebody would put in their records. So if it's not a password reset or an email address verification, we're talking about, receipts or subscription status updates, or if you have something functionally within your app that people sign up for alerts for, those would also be considered transactional. However, if you have some kind of alert transactional mechanism, definitely allow the recipient to customize the frequency. Because if spam complaints start, going up with a certain transactional message, Gmail and Yahoo are going to jump on that. So just, I always just try to look myself in the mirror and be like, is this really a transactional email? And answering that question honestly is key.
Cool. Here's one that's a little tricky because there are some people who don't use our infrastructure, but they use their own custom SMTP like SendGrid. Mm-hmm. So if they're using, say, SendGrid, but they're still using our default unsubscribe functionality, do they still get the one-click unsubscribe?
Yeah.
Is that all still functional?
Yeah, that'll still be functional. I would just say if you are sending from custom SMTP, just double check that DKIM and SPF, because I know some providers don't require it and some do. That would be the thing that I'd be concerned about with a custom SMTP sender. But as far as one-click unsubscribe, the new standard, if you're using our default system, you will be covered well before June 1st. So just to clarify, we have not released this feature yet. We are kind of in the final stages of just smoke testing it and making sure that it's implemented correctly. Because we definitely don't want to release a half-baked, hyper important technical standard. So this will be released well before the June 1st due date.
Cool. Here's another one. So in calculating spam rate, is it right? I mean, oftentimes when you're looking in Google Postmaster tools, there's some peaks and valleys, right?
Yes.
So how is it calculated? Do we know if it's going to be a rolling window, or is it some threshold that one shall never surpass?
We do not. And I don't like giving that answer, but I sometimes feel like saying, we don't know is better than giving incorrect information. So what are the assessment periods? How long am I going to be dinged for like this specific, if I run into this threshold and I run into issues? Or, perhaps senders are already looking in Postmaster tools and they see those gigantic spikes in spam rates, or maybe they'll have issues seeing data surfacing at all. These are all very valid concerns. But one thing to keep in mind is I know for a fact that Gmail and Yahoo their primary goal is being fair, and their goal is to identify spam. So they're doing everything in their power to make sure that they don't miscategorize your email. So kind of reminds me, oh no, I'm not going to quote Lord of the Rings, but there's other forces at work than evil. So at the end of the day, we're just trying to improve the ecosystem. So I'm guessing we may get some more guidance, as time goes on. And like Nancy and I joked, I will be updating our blog post anytime new information is made available. So if you want to just go ahead and bookmark that, probably be a great idea.
Yeah, I guess we didn't really lean hard enough into, I mean, I know how I would feel, right? If I'm sending emails and I see all kinds of new requirements for compliance. The thing is, if you've been following those best practices all along, you're actually most likely in really pretty good shape, not only from a compliance perspective, but also in engagement with your customers, because that means you're sending them the right email. So all of these rules, while they can be a little bit scary at times, ultimately should mean that you end up with a better relationship with your customers through email, that you're landing in the inbox more predictably and in the spam folder less frequently. DMARC. So question about 5,000. Is the 5,000 like 5,000 different email addresses, or is it 5,000 emails for a single send, or is it 5,000 emails for a domain that goes out per day? Like, this is another, like, do we know what that 5,000?
We do know this one. So it is, all these requirements are managed and tracked at the domain level. So if your domain sends 5,000 emails in a day, you would be considered a bulk sender for the duration of your use of that domain. Now, I did mention this before too. That 5,000 number, if you go, you can actually look at if you Google Google Sender Requirements FAQ, they did provide that extra clarification on how these standards and what they mean and how they're going to be rolled out. So in the same breath, they say bulk senders are senders who send more than 5,000 messages in a single day. Although this 5,000 message threshold is not an exact threshold, and it's kind of like when you're trying to wait for data to surface in Postmaster tools. Like, for many of you who have used it, you might have a day where you didn't send very much email at all, maybe 100 messages, and on that day you don't see any reputation data. There is a threshold that you have to reach, but it is not a hard to find number. So 5,000 is the general idea, or the general number we've been provided. But again, if you're sending email, if you're sending one-to-many marketing emails at any rate, I would behoove anyone to just start applying these. Just assume that these apply to you if you are a sender of marketing email. But yeah, it's going to be around 5,000 in a single 24-hour period from a single domain. That's the high level of meeting that threshold. So we do know that.
Yeah. And it's probably not a great, you're better off putting your energy into following best practices than dividing your emails up amongst domains.
And they actually call that out. They call that out. In Gmail, they do fingerprint centers or fingerprint senders. And if there is, and they are looking for people trying to game the system, which is why they mentioned the 5,000 email threshold, but said that it can and very likely will be different on the back end, for the sheer reason of having senders not do that. And that's why Yahoo didn't make a similar claim about, or they didn't make a similar requirement with that exact number. Because it's kind of like that whole thing, like if you deposit more than $10,000 in a US bank account, you have to tell the IRS. So people just keep writing checks and depositing them for $9,999 day after day. Yeah, so I would say if you're even close to meeting that threshold, please just assume that you meet the criteria for these requirements. I just think it's in every sender's best interest.
Yeah. Cool. So here's one, and I don't know if you know this, because we don't export data from Google Postmaster tools to see the spam rate of all of our customers, but
not yet.
Yeah, he's wondering what percent of senders actually have a spam complaint rate of 0.3 or below. This customer is saying they have a 0.5, 0.6%, and seems pretty daunting to try to get that even lower. So I guess one part of that question will be, do we know what percent? And if not, somebody's following the best practices, how can they get it down even lower? And I will put out that caveat that since Google Gmail, Google isn't telling you which email in particular hat, right? You don't know which necessarily is getting that spam complaint. I can see where that also seems super daunting.
For sure. And, one cool trick that I like to do is, like that question was asked, are we ever going to see Gmail spam complaint data in customer IO? And, unfortunately, no, we probably never will. But, if we're troubleshooting, if someone does see a huge spike in their Gmail spam complaint rate, I think more often than not, if you're spiking in Gmail, there's a high chance that you're also going to be getting a lot of complaint rates from other inbox providers. So that's why we'll do kind of a high level peek at all of your campaigns and all of your broadcasts when we're doing the basic nuts and bolts troubleshooting. So if I see a newsletter that was sent to everyone with no engagement based filtration, not much targeting in the audience, and it has a spam complaint rate of 0.1%, which has been like the traditional threshold for when you start to see problems, we can generally make an assumption that was probably the send that did it. Now, Gmail does have a means of, and it's a very difficult to set up, very, very buggy thing, but there is something called the Gmail feedback loop. And what this does require is the creation of even more headers to identify your email traffic. And it's way too much for me to go into right now. We do have some basic guidance on this that customer success can provide to you. It gives you a way of getting a general idea of which mail streams might be generating more complaints. But again, with Gmail, it's very broad. And I do understand if you're already following those best practices and you're seeing those elevated spam complaint rates, there's never really like a finish line for keeping spam complaints or complaint rates low. If you are applying those best practices, if you do have a high sender reputation, you may see a bit more of a light hand as far as mitigation when you reach certain thresholds. So if you have a high domain reputation and you have one day where you might exceed that spam complaint rate threshold, Gmail has traditionally been lighter on senders who consistently maintain high reputations. So, with that said, I'd say keep iterating, keep changing how you're targeting things, change your email frequency, analyze your messaging expectations and how they were set. That's a really important way to reduce those spam complaints even further. So when someone signs up, maybe during the sign-up process, maybe take them to that subscription center. If you have a marketing opt-in box, don't have it checked automatically when somebody signs up. So messaging expectations, continuing to iterate on audiences, maintaining a high reputation, those are critical, as we move into this new era. And that was a very long answer, so.
Okay, so let's say you aren't meeting the spam complaint rates. We have a customer who wants to know, does Gmail start bouncing a portion of your messages starting on February 1st? Are those messages soft bounced if they're going to bounce? Like, what do we know about how those are handled?
So on February 1st, from the updated guidance that's been provided, you're going to start seeing temporary throttling. So what Gmail is trying to do is once these new standards roll out February 1st, their goal is to inform senders, before they start applying really strict measures. So what will happen is on February 1st, if you have a certain campaign or a certain broadcast, and Gmail will track and divide these different mail streams in their own ways as it relates to their anti-spam system. And they're going to give you probably soft bounces at first, saying, hey, we see elevated complaint rates on this message or this campaign or this broadcast, and that'll be a good indicator to senders. So, that something might be going on with that particular message. So I would say starting February 1st, and it's always important to do this, really start paying attention to how Gmail is treating your messages. If you're starting to see a lot of Gmail bounces for your broadcasts, that might be an indicator that, hey, I might need to reassess this audience, reassess the relevance of this information to my audience, because at the end of the day, just sending email to send email, that's not always a great idea. So let's think about, maybe targeting and maybe refactoring some of those deployments.
Yeah, I think that's all really good information. I would also just remind folks that in Customer IO, you can filter like the sends for either a specific campaign or a specific newsletter, or you can look across your all your sends and filter by bounces. And you can actually click on each one and see what the bounce reason is. So that's a great place to look. If you don't want to do it one by one, you can also export that information. And in the CSV, you can kind of do some searches and more analysis there. So just something to keep in mind. Mike, before you mentioned like senders with a high reputation, we have somebody here asking about what if you have a medium reputation, and wondering how if that's going to make a difference for deliverability on whether it's transactional or marketing messages if your IP and or domain reputation is medium.
Domain reputation is definitely going to impact things. IP reputation, as an industry, and aside from Gmail and Yahoo, pretty much with every inbox provider, IP addresses are not a very reliable identifier for a sender. And the reason is, that's why domain is the primary identifier for any sender with Yahoo, with Gmail, with any big provider. And the reason why it's easy to change an IP. You can change an IP in 3 seconds. Changing your domain and your brand is not so easy. So in the last, 5 to 10 years, that has become the primary identifier. So if you have an IP with a medium reputation and it's a high volume IP, it's not going to impact things too much just because there's so much, like, let's say you're sending from a shared IP, or even if you're dedicated IP dips, it will have some impact. But if your domain reputation is lower as that medium, you're going to see a certain measure of spam filtration. And I'd say medium is by no means like a dire situation, but if you do notice that your domain reputation is not at high, now is definitely the time to start taking steps to increase that domain reputation. Now, the way we do that is, like we say, the first thing we're always going to say is apply those best practices. The engagement filter is probably the easiest thing you can do to rapidly improve your performance. So, for example, let's say you have a newsletter with 50,000 recipients and you're sending it to your entire list week after week, month after month. If you notice you had some reputation issues and you apply a segment condition that says, only send this to recipients who have opened this email or clicked it within the last 120 days, 4 months, you'd see an immediate improvement in performance on that broadcast. You would see your reputation over time tick back up to high. If you ever want your reputation to improve faster, and this is a strategy that has worked for us for many, many years and worked for many senders. Let's say you're at a low reputation and you want to increase that reputation up to medium or high. Take that engagement filter of 120 days, and I would say shrink that as far as you're really willing to. For example, say you were using that 120-day filter, and let's say your reputation was slowly improving. If you want to increase the speed at which that happens, focus even more on like people who have opened or clicked within the last 60 days. The more you tighten that time frame, the more reliable that targeting is going to be. And what you're really doing when you do that is you're sending to only people who are proven to open and interact with your messages. And reputation is assessed when they take a look at all the email you send, how many good interactions were had, how many bad interactions were had. A bad interaction, a spam complaint, not opening the email. A good impression would be an open or a click. So you're basically just increasing the ratio of positive impressions, which will increase your reputation.
Cool. So
can't help it.
I know it, but it's so important, right? There's you want to get it to high, and engagement filtering for sure. The only other thing I would, I guess, maybe add to that is if you see a lot of bounce rates, throwing in some verification at the top end, right? So if you're getting a lot of hard bounces, I've got one eye on the question box and trying to think like, how are we going to answer all these questions? Because we do have more questions. You talked about reputation. And so how does that differ between like a parent domain and a subdomain? So, how do they impact each other, rolling up and rolling down?
For sure. So it's definitely a great question. So Gmail compartmentalizes the assessment of reputation at the subdomain level. So each subdomain has its own unique reputation rating, its own unique, or if anything is ever applied to the subdomain, let's say a certain subdomain is seeing high spam complaint rates, running into issues, those outcomes are going to be applied to that subdomain. That throttling, maybe increased filtration, maybe a reputation deduction. So yes, reputation is siloed, but there is one thing with the root domain. The one caveat with that is the root domain essentially stores and consumes the spam complaint rates of all subdomains. So for example, let's say you had a lot of subdomains and you're not sending from your root domain, but let's say you added your root domain to Postmaster Tools and you see an insanely high spam complaint rate where each subdomain individually did not have that. What it's doing is it's aggregating all those spam complaint rates. Now, what impact does that have on the reputation of your root domain? That's an aspect of Gmail deliverability and reputation tracking that isn't well known. I will say, though, if you have a root domain that has a low reputation, but a subdomain that has a high reputation, that low reputation on the root domain is likely not going to directly affect your deliverability on your subdomain. I never say it never will, but this is one of those things that's kind of behind the curtain. But what I will say as a takeaway is focus on your subdomains and focus on your individual domain reputation and keep track of the reputation of any subdomain that you're using. It's all very important data. So is there no influence? I would never say that, but the system is not designed in that way. I do know that. So
yeah, I think that's really good to know. I think the other important thing to keep in mind as a customer IO customer is, even though you might be putting in your root domain example.com, when you send from customer IO, you're sending from a subdomain, right? Like, so it's going to come from CIO something .example.com. So you're never actually sending from the root domain when you send through customer IO to kind of mitigate any risk that if you made a boo-boo.
Yeah. And that's not visible to your recipients, by the way. So there's actually, it's weird, going back to headers, and there's actually two from addresses when an email is sent. There's the display from or the friendly from. That's what your recipient sees in their inbox. And they're going to see your domain as it is, example.com. But the domain that actually gets signed with DKIM and SPF and actually is doing the communicating with the recipient server is that subdomain that Nancy mentioned, that CIO specific one. And if you have any questions about that, we can always go into that a little bit further. But yeah, the idea there is, one thing I don't envy are people using platforms that don't actually use your domain. So on some platforms, the recipient will see your domain, but what's actually doing the sending is a shared group domain that is used by lots of different senders. And we used to do things in this way a long time ago, but we kind of saw the writing on the wall. It's really important to let senders send from their own domains. I don't know. It's nice to know who's sending an email. And that's why we do things in that way.
We've talked a lot about Yahoo and Google, and that we think others will follow suit. But have we heard any rumblings yet from Microsoft? Like, whether it's Outlook or any of their other.
Microsoft. No, we have not. We don't hear. We're in one of the silent periods, I think, with Microsoft. Having a few issues lately, but I think they're working through it. Positive vibes. But no, the only other provider that I've heard chatting, just in kind of some of the industry groups I'm a part of, would be Comcast. But again, no tentative plans. Just they had shown interest in kind of, mirroring some of these requirements, but if I find out that any inbox provider even has this on like their midterm radar, I will definitely raise the alarm for everyone. So
update the blog post.
I don't know, Lord of the Rings, every time it just keeps popping in there. Light the torches.
Here's a good one. Like we've talked about, like, don't worry, Google and Yahoo are going to know what it's a transactional email and what's not. Yeah. Do we know how they're identifying what's a transactional email and what's not?
I asked them this on a panel in person. No. They told, but they gave assurances to, myself, a ton of other senders from various different companies, all there asking the same questions. And basically the answer was trust us. So again, I think that the worst thing you can do in deliverability is make a statement of fact that you don't know for a fact. Yeah. So we don't know, but we have received assurances. So, and again, it actually does make sense though, kind of hearkening back to when I mentioned what happens if I don't have the unsubscribe link as required. As far as I know, they will not be bouncing emails, filtering emails based on a lack of that new style one-click header. What will happen though is I think that let's say you have a marketing message and you're running into issues, or let's say you have a transactional message that had some marketing content and they don't see that unsubscribe link, they're not going to help you. It's kind of the takeaway and what they've actually stated. So they would, but yeah, circling back just to not get too far off the path. We've received assurances that they will be able to differentiate, and I mean, the most you can do is just move forward in good faith. And I think that that's true, though. They have insanely advanced systems, more than we could possibly imagine. So, yeah, and they're constantly iterating, constantly adjusting. Pretty sure they're using some form of AI. Like, actually, I know for a fact they are. So,
great. So, kind of carrying on the transactional, non-transactional, somebody is asking, is the domain reputation linked only to your marketing emails or also to your transactional emails, which is going to be somewhat dependent on how you've got it set up, right?
Sort of. So I do know that in general, you'll want to be using a different subdomain for your marketing and your transactional sending. That is the ideal setup. Is it required? No. Is it best for everyone? No. But one thing that will differentiate too is the namespace in your email address. So let's say you don't have the means of making a new subdomain, or that's just not something that you feel like you want to roll out, requires warming. It's a bit of a heavy lift to make a new subdomain and have it function gracefully. So you're sending marketing and transactional from the same domain, even differentiating it with a friendly email address. Like, so let's say marketing@example.com or notifications@example.com. Those two are not going to have their own reputation, but that does assist Google in identifying. So anything that you can do from a sender identity standpoint like that is all going to be a part of that fingerprint. So Google will make efforts to differentiate that traffic. However, if your domain has a low to bad reputation, that's going to impact all traffic regardless of the namespace and the email address. So for that reason, you really do want to try to split those mail streams. Ideally, different domains and different IPs, and I mean subdomains, not root domains. Don't send from a lot of different root domains. It's not always bad, but I would just say stick with the subdomain differentiation. And if you ever need help with that and you want to move forward, our team's always here to help with that as well.
Okay, so we've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to add.
Oh my gosh,
I know. I'm going to tee up one last question here,
sure.
and then we'll get into the closure. But since people, when they hear the answer, they might go ahead and sign off, I just want to ask folks that you're going to get a survey. So it's really helpful for us to know how, like, if this session was helpful, if you'd like to see more sessions like this, what kind of sessions would you like to see, all of that. So please look out for the follow-up email. I will try to get the PDF that I'm linked to, but know that it's 0.3 spam rate, not 0.03 if that fires before I get a chance. And then, and then just know you can reach out to either your dedicated customer success manager or generically to success at Customer IO if you don't have a dedicated CSM. And it's always great to carry on conversations in the community. So with that, I will tee up the last question. Just wanted to squeeze that in. Question about double opt-in having an impact. So it sounds like this particular customer, they're following some good best practices. People sign up, they're hitting zero bounce, which validates, verifies is this email valid? Is it closed? Is it a spam trap? Blah blah blah. But it's not 100% accurate, and so they're asking, how much of an impact does double opt-in really have? Like, how do they convince their boss that this is a good thing to do?
That's something that that's always the thing with deliverability advice. Getting buy-in from people who, might not understand what that real impact is. I mean, not many people sit in the weeds and read about deliverability every day, like a lot of us do. So, double opt-in, it does kind of create sort of an existential situation. So, email validation tools are great, but they are not a replacement for double opt-in. And what double opt-in, where it really becomes important, is it becomes important with spam complaint rates one. So you're getting a recipient that not only took the initiative to sign up for your email list, but doubled down on that. It's like do you want to go to Red Lobster tonight? Yes. Are you sure? Heck yeah. That's double opt-in, or whatever restaurant you like. I actually hate Red Lobster, but double opt-in's also really critical when it comes to more deep compliance issues. So everyone always has a fear of block lists in the industry. Spamhaus is the most dangerous block list that a sender can be on. Anytime I've ever dealt with a customer who unfortunately got their domain listed on Spamhaus, the first question that they will ask is, do they have confirmed opt-in? If the answer is no, they will not delist the domain. So that's another one. You know, for many block lists and many anti-abuse systems, if you unfortunately get on their radar, they, and by extension me, are going to require that double opt-in be implemented, or we can't move forward, which could lead to blocks with Gmail, Yahoo, Microsoft, things like that. So again, there's the security and compliance side of things, and it's just really a great practice. You know, let's say somebody accidentally signed up, and you send that double opt-in email, and they're like, on second thought, I actually don't want these emails. You just avoided spam complaints right there. So it is a way to give even more power to your customers to double down on their desire to receive communication from you. And yeah, if that would be my high level answer. And I think for me personally, for my profession, Spamhaus is the reason why confirmed opt-in and double opt-in are required, because it's just a scary place to be. And they don't happen that often. It's usually pretty egregious when you get listed, but if it does happen, Also, it's really great for avoiding bot attacks and things. So yeah, you can use an email validation service, but if you get list bombed, how are you going to differentiate your organic signups from the ones that came in fraudulently? Again, an existential risk. So a lot of things like that. I'd say there's probably 100 reasons to use double opt-in, but those are the scariest. So I hate ending things on such a spooky note, but yeah. But I just did. So anyway.
Yeah. I know we're over, but I'll ask you one more question so you don't end on that. Yeah. So somebody's asking, will Yahoo also have a rollout? Like, are they just following the same schedule that Google is?
About the same.
Starting February 1, essentially?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they do have more detailed guidance and FAQs, and there are a few differences. For one thing, Yahoo did not give a threshold for what they consider a bulk sender to be. Their messaging essentially been like, come on, you're sending messages that apply to this. That's kind of been the wink, and that's why I, from the very beginning, have been like, everybody needs to do this. Just do it. Unless you plan on never growing your email list, which I don't know many email marketers who are like that. So if you have a small list now and you're going to have a big one later, why not lay the groundwork as soon as possible?
Cool. There was one, I'm going to address one question that Leah already brought up, and someone was wondering if we can give out the question and answers from the chat that came up. You're going to get a follow-up email that has the recording, and that recording, not the one that goes onto our standard recording page that has everything, but when you get the link as a follow-up, I believe that you're going to see all the chat and all the Q&A from this. So that's where you should be able to look, but just know that it's only specific if you registered and if you signed up. Do you get to see that chat? If you're coming in after the fact and watching the recording from the community page where we have all the recordings, that chat and Q&A gets trimmed out. So hopefully that's helpful there. And with that, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you for all your patience, getting through all the questions. Really appreciate your interest, and just know we're here for you. If you have more questions, hit up your customer success manager. And if it goes beyond what we know, we'll be sure to loop in Mike or Connor, our deliverability team, and make sure we get you the right answer. So thanks, everybody. Yep. Thanks. Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah.
And Leah. Bye.